In the chaotic years after the First World War, as America tried to get back on its feet, a chilling document was supposedly created. It wasn't a treaty or a declaration of peace. It was a list of 30,000 American citizens. But these people weren't criminals. They were the poor, the sick, the disabled, and anyone seen as morally or intellectually less than in the cold, cruel language of the time. They were the unfit and the story goes that the purpose of this file was to make every single one of them disappear. The whole idea is monstrous, isn't it? A government plan to just erase tens of thousands of its own citizens. Now, whether a single physical 1919 file ordering this actually existed is up for debate. But honestly, its absence doesn't make the story any less terrifying. Because the truth is, a plan like this wasn't just possible in early 20th century America, it was the logical next step for a hugely popular and powerful ideology. This was the age of eugenics, the so-called science of better breeding. And this idea captivated scientists, politicians, and wealthy citizens who truly believed they could perfect humanity by cutting off what they called defective germplasm. So, this isn't really the story of one mythical file. It's the story of the dark, very real history that made that file imaginable, and the actual programs that targeted hundreds of thousands of Americans for elimination. To understand how a nation built on liberty could even think about something so dark, you have to meet the men who were selling the idea. This wasn't some fringe movement whispered in back alleys. It was treated as a serious, celebrated field of science, pushed by some of the most respected figures of the day. At the center of it all was Charles Davenport, a prominent biologist who ran the eugenics record office in Cold Spring Harbor, New York. With funding from giants like the Carnegie Institution and the Harriman Railroad family, his office became the headquarters for American eugenics. His goal was both simple and horrifying: to apply the rules of animal breeding to people. The eugenics record office sent field workers all over the country to collect family histories, studying people in mental hospitals, orphanages, and prisons to trace the roots of unfitness. Working right beside him was Harry H. Laughlin, the superintendent of the record office. If Davenport was the respectable scientist, Laughlin was the fanatic. He was obsessed with the idea of national purity and saw anyone defective as a biological threat to America. In his mind, things like poverty, criminality, and epilepsy weren't caused by your circumstances. They were genetic flaws that had to be stamped out. The list of who they considered unfit was huge and terrifyingly vague. It wasn't just the mentally and physically disabled. It included the poor, who they called paupers. It targeted immigrants, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, who were seen as genetically inferior to the Nordic stock of the original white settlers. It could basically include anyone who didn't fit into a very narrow, prescribed box. And this wasn't just talk. They presented these ideas as urgent solutions to all of society's problems. A way to weed out the unfit. The language they used was chillingly dehumanizing. People were socially inadequate, a menace, or carriers of defective germplasm. And this idea was shockingly popular. Figures like Alexander Graham Bell voiced support for eugenic principles, and while his views were complex, even Theodore Roosevelt was influenced by the call for race betterment. State fairs held fitter families contests, where white families were literally judged and given medals for their eugenical worth. Eugenics was taught in colleges and preached from pulpits. It was a national crusade to improve the American people by getting rid of anyone who didn't fit the perfect mold. The men behind eugenics didn't just want to write papers. They wanted action. Their campaign to purify the American gene pool moved on two main fronts: keeping undesirables out, and stopping the unfit already here from having children. The first front was immigration. Harry Laughlin became the movement's star witness in Congress, where he gave scientific testimony claiming that the new waves of immigrants were genetically inferior. His work was a key factor in passing the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924, which slammed the door on immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia, all to preserve America's racial stock. The second front was even more chilling: the war on reproduction. The ultimate tool for eugenicists was compulsory sterilization. Starting with Indiana in 1907, states began passing laws that gave the government the power to forcibly sterilize people they deemed unfit, targeting people in prisons and psychiatric hospitals who were completely at the state's mercy. But the movement needed a major legal win. They found it in the tragic case of Carrie Buck. Carrie was a poor young woman from Virginia who was sent to a state institution after having a child out of wedlock. Officials declared that she, her mother, and her infant daughter were all feeble-minded. Her case was deliberately engineered to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1927, in the infamous case of Buck versus Bell, the highest court in the land gave its blessing. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote a line that should send a shiver down your spine: "It is better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." That ruling was a green light. In the years that followed, more states passed sterilization laws, many based on a model law that Harry Laughlin had drafted back in 1914. His proposal was terrifyingly broad, covering the feeble-minded, insane, criminalistic, epileptic, inebriate, diseased, blind, deaf, deformed, and dependent a category so wide it could include orphans and the homeless. Over the next few decades, around 65,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized, often without their knowledge or consent. The victims were overwhelmingly women, people of color, and the poor. So, while a single file ordering 30,000 people to disappear might be a myth, the year 1919 was uniquely ready for such a horrible idea. America was a powder keg. Soldiers were coming home from war to find no jobs. The fear of communism was exploding into the first Red Scare, and racial hatred was hitting a fever pitch. That summer became known as the Red Summer for the blood that ran in the streets of dozens of American cities. White mobs attacked African American communities from Chicago to Washington, D.C., leaving hundreds dead. This violence wasn't separate from eugenics. It was fueled by it. Eugenic ideas gave a pseudoscientific excuse for white supremacy. In this climate of fear and hate, writers like Lothrop Stoddard published best-selling books with titles like The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. These books stoked paranoia about genetic annihilation and painted non-white people as enemies. For some, the racial violence of the Red Summer was seen as a necessary defense of the white race. The idea of eliminating undesirables wasn't just a clinical theory anymore. It was merging with raw hatred and real-world violence. In a climate like that, a list of people to be removed wasn't a stretch of the imagination at all. The American eugenics movement didn't just stay in America. Its ideas spread, and they found a very eager audience across the Atlantic. In Germany, a then-unknown man named Adolf Hitler was in prison in 1924, reading American eugenics textbooks. He openly admired what America was doing. In his book Mein Kampf, he wrote, "There is today one state in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of citizenship are noticeable. Of course, it is not our model German Republic, but the United States." The connection wasn't accidental. It was direct. When the Nazis rose to power, they passed their own sterilization law in 1933, and it was based directly on Harry Laughlin's model from America. German race scientists even wrote to their American counterparts to make sure they were getting it right. In 1936, Harry Laughlin was awarded an honorary degree from a German university for his work in the science of racial cleansing. The Nazis were, as one American eugenicist put it, simply beating us at our own game. The sterilization programs in America legitimized the idea that a state could control who gets to have children, an idea the Nazi regime would take to its most monstrous conclusion. And even after the world saw the horrors of the Holocaust, forced sterilizations didn't just stop in the U.S. The practice continued in some states into the 1970s, targeting poor black women in the South and Native American women. This is a heavy topic, and it's a part of our history that is too often ignored. I'm sure you have thoughts, so let's talk about it in the comments below. And if you believe these are stories that need to be told, consider subscribing for more looks into our forgotten past. So, what about the 1919 files? We may never know for sure if it was a real proposal, a sick thought experiment, or just a rumor that captured the fears of the time. But in the end, the physical file doesn't matter. What matters is that the system to create that list was already being built. The ideology to justify it was being celebrated in universities and halls of power. And the tools to enforce it, segregation and forced sterilization, were already being used on thousands of Americans. The most extreme eugenicists had proposed sterilization categories so broad they could have logically targeted millions of Americans. They didn't need one secret file ordering 30,000 people to disappear. They were building a machine out in the open to erase them from the future. The true horror isn't a lost document, but the documented, undeniable truth of what America was willing to do to its own citizens in the name of creating a perfect society. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous ideas are the ones that are sold to us as progress.